Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. I am Dr. Jones, the owner of Jones Counseling Consultant, a counseling professional. Glad to be back here with you again.
And me as well, Derek Lott, a professional negotiator. Love communicating and talking about today's topic, masculinity. I'm looking forward to getting to it.
It's always a pleasure, gentlemen. Brian Boyd, as always, I'm a software engineer.
And I'm happy to be here as well, having a conversation with you gentlemen. I'm AJ, I'm a clinical pharmacist.
So what is masculinity, if I can ask?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's just about being a male, just living, breathing. I don't put a lot of focus on what a male is or masculinity. It's something I've been my whole life. I know it's gained a lot of attention here lately, but it's just about living life.
Yeah, for me, it's just me being myself, just being true to who I am. What does it that AJ likes? What is it that I'm doing? Just me being born as a male and living who I am, that's in and of itself masculinity in my perspective, because that's who I am, just being true to who I am as a child of God, a man of God.
Yeah, I also agree. Masculinity is, I guess it's not something that you can be, it's something that you are. And that comes from knowing who you are first, knowing how you operate, knowing your likes, your dislikes, your strengths, your weaknesses, and then living in that as much as possible.
I think about all of the things you guys were saying. And for me, as a black man, masculinity is something I had to see in a father figure, to see in my uncles and the various men, adult men that were around me. And being raised by a single mom, I didn't have those examples necessarily. And the ones that I had were very poor. And masculinity began for me to be everything they weren't. So whatever they were, I hated in them. I said, that's not who I'm going to be. I'm going to be the antithesis of that. And that began to be my masculinity. And do you know that people criticize me for not being abusive? Not bringing the hammer down, not manning up in your house and telling your woman what time to be home and what time dinner better be ready. You losing your manhood. You be a man. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you all's perspective is on that, because it's very powerful for a young man to come up. And masculinity, I hear you, but it's taught. We teach our young men masculinity and how to be men. But I could be wrong.
I think masculinity derives from deeper within, right? Those examples that you just made mention of, they were obviously poor examples, but they had nothing to do with masculinity. That was just character flaws. And unfortunately in society, a lot of times, those things are what people try to identify as masculinity or toxic masculinity.
That's good. I like that.
But in all actuality, it has nothing to do with masculinity, because there's some abusive females, that have some of those same characteristics that you just made mention of. So, but great point that you raised about what you saw, because I don't think too many of us had good, strong male examples. One of the things going to the barbershop that the old men would say, they used the word that I can't use on here, but it rhymed with pissy.
Right. Okay.
So just like a letter off.
And it was, but it was very common, right? But they were good, solid men. Outside of that, just was their generation and the way that they spoke.
So just so I could understand you, really, I guess masculinity, through your definition, is not really much so like a character. It's more than a characteristic. Because there's just certain definitions that were thrown out that I heard you threw out that was all wrong, that didn't seem right at all, that was considered masculinity. But that's a characteristic, which in and of itself is not masculinity. So, like you're saying, like masculinity is deeper than that within yourself. Okay, that's good. No.
Yeah, and I think when you think about it, those are things, and as you mentioned, those are traits and stuff that people exhibit, but they don't necessarily define who we are. Even when it comes to like our respective roles in our professions, we all do these things: pharmacy, counseling, speaker, amazing. And even me as like an engineer, but thinking about that, those are just roles that we fill. they're not speaking to who we actually are.
Yeah.
You know, we're people fulfilling the role, but at the end of the day, we're still people, because if that role leaves us and these traits and stuff leaves us, we're still at the core people.
Me being a man, like going based on what you were saying about being observant as a child, I always observed my dad, a military colonel in the Air Force. He led an entire base not by himself, but he was a commander of an Air Force base. And so I admire the man tremendously. But one thing that I noticed from him is he never asked for help. Like, he always said, I got it. That's like his favorite word, I got it. If he's out mowing the grass and I see him sweating and pounding, hey, Dad, you need help? I got it, don't worry about it. Hey, Dad, you need help changing the tire? I got it, man, don't worry about it. Hey, Dad, do you need help like going out washing your car? Don't worry about it, I got it. So that was one of the things that I thought was manhood, but I realized that it wasn't really right for me. Because I'll give you an example. When I'm working at the pharmacy and I'm checking scripts, there's phone ringing all over the place, and then there's like a patient who has like a question for me. I tell the whole staff, don't worry about it, I got it. Even though it's gonna stress me out in the long run, because that is so much stuff going on, and the staff is looking at me like, AJ, I can get it, but I'm like, don't worry about it, I got it. Because that's what I thought manhood was and is, and that's something I'm still working on, to be honest with you. But just having people in my corner, other men in my corner, even my dad, like as he grew up, he was saying like, hey, learn to keep your peace. Like, that's something I didn't do. He admitted to that. So that right there was what my definition of manhood is, and still is drilled in my head that I'm still working on.
So AJ, you just spoke to manhood, right? Which is very different than masculinity, right? Because manhood is a process that we go through throughout our life. And masculinity starts when we're born. So you're born a male, and being masculine is something that's rooted within us. The same way for females, femininity. Well, you definitely have to edit this. It's something that that they have naturally. And I think part of the challenge that we are facing today is it has been given a negative and a black eye. Just being masculine. And then that's where that term toxic masculinity comes into place. So what are you guys' thoughts on toxic masculinity?
I think even growing up, because I grew up single parent home. I'm the oldest of 10 total siblings, but I grew up the oldest of like 7 in the home. So for me, being a man was basically fulfilling that role. So not only being there for myself, but me even being a young child, I had to grow up just a little bit more to help take care of my siblings. So that's all I saw, you know, seeing how the interactions, how a man's supposed to interact, but me at the same time not really knowing how to be a man. So bringing that back into the role of like toxic masculinity, where you put everything into perspective, I believe personally, like when you look at the roles and the definitions that we have in society, they're not necessarily, once again, what makes us a man. We're born masculine, we're all apt to traits, but I think in the same sense, we're told to tone down those things. So for instance, we're not supposed to be outspoken. We're supposed to take situations and just deal with those things and internalize those things. But it negates the fact that at the end of the day, we're still human. We still have these feelings, we have these emotions. And if we don't express those things positively, then it gives birth to all of the negative things that do happen: addiction, abuse, you know, domestic violence, all of those things exactly are rooted in us not being who we are at the end of the day.
That's real.
So to hide a piece of yourself.
I'm more of an outspoken person myself, or I'm flamboyant. So if I internalize, energy comes in, energy has to come out for me. So it's channeling that energy, like you said, going to the gym. I'm not gonna lie to you, that helps tremendously. Listening to some music, tune out the world, and just go ham on the steering. I mean, not the steering wheel, like the man, you know what I'm saying, like the weights. The weights, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
See, I love that. I'm gonna tell you what I love about what you just said. So we're having this conversation about masculinity, right? And AJ, you just used the word flamboyant. That's normally not associated with masculinity, right?
I wasn't gonna say nothing.
But it came out in such a natural way, and nobody buzzed or looked at AJ crazy for saying it. But you never normally hear that word married with masculinity in any kind of way. So I really appreciate that.
AJ, I can't agree more. Your usage of that word, I didn't think twice that it had anything to do with masculinity, your masculinity. And I think it's important that we stop there to talk about how we project things on people because of the words that we may hear, because of something we may read in a newspaper, some article, something we may study that hasn't been validated, to your point, doctor. And we'll go and take it and run with it.
You know, touching on flamboyancy, right? Historically speaking, it's usually associated with women and how the way that they dress and the way that they style. But even with us as men, we dress the same way. We wear suits, we have different shoes, we have different clothes and jackets for different situations. And even looking back historically in the 19th century, it was uncommon for men to wear watches. But yet most men today wear watches. It was considered, a feminine thing to wear watches. But looking at that evolution over time, you get to see that these words are just like other words. They only have the connotations that are associated with it. So for instance, if we refer to people as broke or poor, there's an image there. If we look at people as CEOs, there's an image there. Doctor, lawyer, athlete, rapper. And when you think about these things, there's an image that comes to mind. But we give that image power because of the word associations that it has with it.
I think that you guys made some really great points, and certainly to your point, I operate from a place of evidence, right? And everything has to be rooted in evidence. So when I hear that term toxic masculinity, what and how much research, credible research, has been done to support this? And that's a part of the challenge that we have with that word because it's rooted in opinions. Just like when I hear people say that someone is being misogynistic, what evidence do we have that somebody hates females? Unless, of course, it's on their social media and they're holding signs that all women, that type of stuff. So we have a responsibility to at least empower people with perspective when it comes to those things. If not, it will always be an attack. Growing up, I didn't see a lot of positive men just like yourself. In fact, I think most of the men I saw probably would be considered trash these days. And a part of that was growing up thinking that what a man should represent was all false. So just like many young men who don't have father figures at home and in the urban community, I'm not ashamed to say where I was set in comparison to where I'm at today. Probably was, we call it players. Mm-hmm. Females call it womanizers. Being in Atlanta, Georgia at 16 years old and talking to grown women was so common, like so common. Now I'm looking back at it and I realize that there probably some pedophile behavior going on because there was nothing I could have said to these women at 16 years old that should have made them look twice. But that was a part of the culture. So I was toxic in a lot of ways, and that carried into my early adulthood as a male because I thought those things were what we're supposed to do. But when you know better, you do better, and you also teach others that that's not the way to go. Because for men in my practice, I have to, because we love to make excuses for our behavior. Well, I told her what it was. It wasn't a relationship. She knew what it was. So I have to empower men with this basic thought that as long as you're entertaining a woman, regardless of what you tell her, if you're texting her, if you're calling her, if she's coming over spending time, the meta message is that you do want something with her other than what you're trying to get from her, right? But that was a growth process. But the me now and the me then, two totally different people, and I can see why some of those things could have been identified as me being on the verge of being a toxic man. Mm-hmm. So that's the accountability piece.
So now, it's really interesting how you talked about that transition and transformation even. It's a display of behaviors. Mm-hmm. And what kind of behaviors demonstrate the masculinity that we should hold each other accountable for?
Well, Freaknik 95, 96, that wasn't the type of behavior, right? But what I would certainly say is we have to, iron sharpens iron. And I think conversations like what we're having right now, it's exactly in the way that we carry ourselves, the way that we talk about ourselves, as well as the way we talk about females, go a long way in changing that narrative, as well as being that example that we want others to emulate.
Yeah, I think it stem everything from the foundation of the biblical, from the Bible. I mean, just being the head of the household. Man is the head of the household, I believe. The leader. I think of leadership as a man. I think about responsibility and discipline as a man, like being the provider that you're called to be. And there's different ways to provide. You have your own different interpretations of being a provider, but I believe that's a trait that all men should have, especially as the head of the household.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because the two things that's associated with masculinity, we have to be protectors and providers. But what does that look like? Of course, we're supposed to protect our family, physically, mentally, financially, spiritually, and then we're supposed to provide for them. But there's so many ways to provide outside of just financially. We have to be there for them. We're supposed to teach them, lead them, guide them, direct them. If things go wrong, they're supposed to be able to lean on us, and then we lean on God in order to give them the solutions that they need. And I think that as concerning masculinity specifically, like, we really should focus on those elements as well, and see what true providing is just outside of the financial piece. I mean, it's important, but it's not the only thing.
No, that's real. Like, when you mentioned that protection part, that's real, because my fiance, she always says, "You protect me." And when I'm thinking protection, like protecting like against anybody who comes at her, you know what I'm saying? Like physically. But she's like, "No, you protect me emotionally. Like, I feel emotionally protected around you just because I could listen." And so just listening to that, there's different levels of protection as well. And that's just like how it is with being a man. Like, there's different levels to it. There's different interpretations of it. But just being true to yourself really is what I'm getting at.
So I think that in this day and age, we also got to be very mindful when we talk about, and you spoke about this in the very beginning, where I'm the man, I'm the head, you listen to me, right? In today's culture, things have shifted so much that we still have to be respectful in the way that we approach that, because women are out earning men. Most women are the head of their households. So even if we meet a woman who has been the head, just because we're male, we can't come in and say, "Well, hey, I'm here now," and all of that changed. So got to be respectful. So I think this was a wonderful conversation. Love what everyone had to say. And I'm certain that these conversations can continue moving forward. So appreciate you guys.